Let me free your mind. Welcome to Working Dogs and Whiskey. I'm Sean White. I'm here with my co-host Jonathan Moses, where we have open and honest conversations as we dive into the world of dog training.
Hey, what's up, dude?
Not much, man. What's been going on?
Staying busy. Got a bunch of training dogs at the kennel right now. I think I've got 7 dogs. I got 5 leaving this week, but I think I got 5 more coming in. So staying pretty busy. Got all the dogs that were trying to rip my head off out of there, which is nice. No more aggression cases. One fear aggressive dog, but I'm not too worried about her. She's not Bo, who I was worried about my life every day I walk into the kennel, or at least my well-being. But other than that, not too much. I'm down in Florence now getting some stuff done. What you got going
on? Kind of been moving around, traveling and doing some stuff. I'm actually not at my house right now. I'm currently in North Carolina. I live in South Carolina, so the sound quality isn't that great. I'm doing it from a hotel room yet again. So if we played the episodes in the right order, the previous episode, I was doing the same thing. So, but if not, whatever. That's my situation right now. But coming off of one high and then kind of going down into not so much my playing field. And pretty much what I'm getting at is I just did a 5-day seminar with Carlos Ramirez, which was phenomenal, dude. Like, definitely developed a new respect for him and his body of work and what he has to contribute to the industry. But I'm actually looking forward to him to working with him. Hopefully once I'm done with this current course that I'm in. But did that for 5 days, learned a good amount about decoying and just dog behavior in general, which I'll probably tap into it later on. And now I'm currently going through a leadership course for the military. So, I mean, I'm good with leadership and all that. It's just, me, I love dog training. So it's just, it's like on a high, and then now I got to settle down and buckle into the military side of things, which is no problem.
It's funny because last week was essentially a school, like you were in school, even though it was on a very specific topic. And then where you're at now is still schooling, but just your outlook on it.
Oh, yeah.
Completely changes. It's natural, but it's funny how when we're motivated by one thing we really enjoy, it's like going from your favorite subject, let's say science, and then you got to go sit in English class and you're like, I hate this.
Yeah, that's pretty well. I don't hate it, but it's just when you compare the two, significant difference, in arousal and all that. But it's not bad. I mean, they have a better program with the military as far as how they do things and introduce the leadership aspect of it. So it's pretty neat.
Cool? Is it all Marines or is it all branches?
No, so this one is just Marines, and then we have somebody from the UAE, I believe.
Oh, okay, sweet.
So yeah, so he's tagging along with us. He's actually in my group. He's pretty cool. But yeah, it's just strictly for each rank has they call it a professional military education, I think. That's what I should probably know what that stands for. PME. But yeah, every rank you have to go through a course in order to get promoted. And
really,
but it's actually good.
Every rank?
Huh?
I did not know you guys did that at every rank.
Yeah, every rank. So right now, the one for me is 7 weeks long, and I just closed out week 1, so I got 6 more weeks. But yeah, it's pretty cool. It reminds me of like the dog training community, like how I was brought up with compulsion and stuff like that. It's just very mainstream, and then you start to learn more about the emotional correlations with dogs and stuff like that, conditioning or different methods of conditioning, delayed conditioning, simultaneous conditioning, all that, the nuances of dog training. And it's kind of
Yeah.
where the Marine Corps is at with the leadership as far as their schools. It was, of course, being a Marine. The last one I went to in 2018 was very physically demanding and stuff like that. Like, it was more focused on that. And then you got some classes and stuff, and you had to do a few presentations, but it wasn't anything strenuous or whatever. But this one, now in 2024, so 6 years later, it's actually oriented more about group discussion. It's not your instructor kind of bashing you in a sense. They're focused on actual development and
Oh, I like this. This is like a tier system. Like
yeah,
they know you have the foundational skills from the prior class, so now you can build up to mental learning and learning to be a better leader, essentially.
yeah. It's definitely been interesting in comparison from the last time I went to now. So and then it's structured like for like a university kind of.
Oh, all right. I like that.
Yeah,
I know for ours, for the Air Force, it was E1. Once you get E4 and you're getting ready to roll over to E5, which is your non-commissioned officer or whatever, it's like your first leadership tier. Because technically, as an
okay.
E4, you're in a leadership role, almost like an assistant supervisor. But E5 is where you get into your supervisor tier. But you have to go to Airman Leadership School. But you don't have to do that for like from E5 to E6. But once you get to Master, Senior, Chief, then you go through another version. But we don't require it at every rank, so that's pretty interesting. I kind of like that. A little bit more
Yeah.
detailed.
Yeah, we need it. no, it keeps things modest. But so what are we getting into today, man? I know we just went on a tangent about the military.
Yeah, no, but it's
man.
interesting. I don't know. I like it. I didn't know that's how it was set up. That's pretty cool. So I guess for this week, what we're going to talk about, it's completely random. Something we saw in a book called Raising Men by Eric Davis. So one of the topics in that book was cognitive dissonance, the perception of contradictory information and the mental toll of it. And we just kind of started going off about that and rattling off some ideas and how that affects us in our day-to-day life, dog training, you name it, it hits everywhere. And if you kind of want to get into that a little bit, our example was, well, the example in the book that the guy used was he's a sniper instructor that teaches people how to shoot. And he says the biggest hump he had to get over was as he's teaching people, maybe growing up for their 10th birthday, grandpa took them out in the woods and taught them how to shoot, right? And even though he can show them all the science, all the facts and information of why what they're doing is wrong or how it could be improved, because it has an emotional correlation and connection, it's the biggest challenge to get over, to the point where people aren't even willing to take what he said into consideration at first.
That's hilarious, man. Yeah, for me, I think we see a lot of that as it intertwines with like the dog training aspect. I actually just recently learned the difference between imprinting and conditioning, and I think it kind of follows some of that model. So like taking into consideration what you just said about you have 10-year-old Johnny, let's say he grew up in the rural backwoods of America or whatever, and goes in the woods and grandpa teaches him how to shoot some type of weapon system, shotgun, rifle, take your pick. But anyways, what that does, and I'm not saying at 10 that's a specific age, but it is for humans anyway, it's a pretty important stage of learning.
Yeah.
And so that gets imprinted into his head. Like, this is how I shoot. And because, like you mentioned, there's emotional correlation there, right? It's from grandpa. It's not, I went to the gun range and some random guy that I have no connection. It's grandfather. So, but what that does is it automatically stamps something in his brain. This is how it's done. This is the rules and everything behind it. And so you fast forward later on, and the instructor's trying to tell him, no, dude, like, ballistics, trajectory, all this, windage and all this stuff. And he's like, no, grandpa didn't say shit about that. So it must
Yeah.
can't be true. So
You
and
call
it's
my
a whole
grandpa a
thing.
liar?
Yeah. And that's essentially how they take it. It's like, I learned from the best. And it's like, dude, your grandpa was a fucking butcher, man. Like, you didn't
Yeah.
do that as a profession. But like you said, it's hard to distance yourself from something like that. So, and I'll put it, no, I'll put it one way for dogs, and then I do have a question for you. So,
Yeah.
and I want to know your interpretation. But how I've seen it with dogs is you kind of have the same model. Is that they're young, they have their critical stage of development. What is it? Between like 6 to 12 weeks or something of that nature. And
Yeah,
or
6
I
to
think they
12
start
weeks,
learning
I
at
think we've
5
seen.
weeks,
I think 6
roughly.
weeks is the first time we can track it.
Okay,
5 to
so
6
yeah,
weeks.
somewhere around there. Yeah. Um, but anyways, it's when they start to develop, a system, so to speak, or they start to learn processes and stuff like that. And so you have that moment, those couple of weeks, where you can define the dog as what it's going to be, you know, and and a lot of that plays into what they see, their environments, and all that. But where it correlates with the story that you just mentioned is that what they do in those couple of weeks is what is imprinted into their head. Like that is gospel to them. Like there's no deviation from it. And I know the argument's going to be, well, I've trained my dog to do this, and now you've masked a lot of stuff. But in the back of his head, he's like, this is what I learned. This is what's true. So if you have cases like reactivity, we'll just go with the classic examples. Reactivity to dogs, people, whatever, certain circumstances, lack of exposure. The dog doesn't get out. He stays in the backyard. He, stays wherever, somewhere where the elements aren't that stressful, and he doesn't see any of that. That can be a very dangerous thing. And then you go outside that learning period, and it's kind of hard to recover or get them to recover from it. But yeah, it's just one of those things where you have to be careful when you're working with younger dogs and stuff like that, and understanding what you're doing and how much of an impact that will be. And I think the best way that it's been described to me, imprinting versus conditioning, is essentially I can take a ball of paper, or rather take a piece of paper, ball it up, and then you could tell me, hey, you got to smooth it back out as best as possible. I can make it as flat and all that, but you're still going to see the wrinkles from when I originally crumpled it. And those wrinkles are uh, basically the imprinting of it. Like, yeah, we smoothed it out, and the process of smoothing the paper out would be synonymous with conditioning. So you can smooth it out, but it's still, the imprint is still there. So like Johnny, for example, with this shooting. Yeah, he may have been a Navy SEAL and all that great stuff, and murk some motherfuckers and all that using what the instructor told him. But if you put him in that same scenario in the woods, like back home where he learned how to originally shoot, he probably won't apply all the fundamentals that he learned. He's going to apply something from grandpa,
Oh, yeah.
essentially.
That emotional
So,
connection.
yeah, I mean, grandpa, you can't outshoot him.
Yeah,
But,
and that's knowingly or unknowingly. He may just default to that.
yeah. And that's what I think a lot of people don't consider. And we saw it even in the decoy seminar where here we go. Now we're gonna go on a tangent. The whole pushing versus pulling with dogs and shit like that. And I was so relieved that he kind of confirmed my beliefs, because I've been saying this for years. I was like, I don't think that's something that we can just erase from a dog,
No.
like permanently. But people, there are motherfuckers that are determined to, like, he will push, and they're putting these dogs through some craziness, for one behavior. And I'm like, that's imprinted in them. And that's one of the things that we actually sat down and talked about. Not even with the dogs, on a person biting or whatever. It was, we sat down and he was like, look, I can make your dogs look decent. I can smooth out the paper. But that pulling shit is what he's done since he was young. and nobody countered it. And so that will forever be there. But the thing that I liked about it is that we talked about, all right, from a strategic point, and I won't go into the details on that, but how do we use that to our advantage? Because we know the dog's going to do it. And I think that's a big consideration with dog training is people, and to include myself, let me not say people, like even myself, we don't analyze things as, okay, this is something that the dog will always do. How do I leverage that? Instead, we try to, human nature, I can force it out of them, or I can make them stop doing that. And it's just, some things aren't that way.
Now, even an example of it, so you talked about that behavior always being there. You can smooth that piece of paper out, but the wrinkles aren't necessarily going to disappear. In the kennel right now, I've got a dog named Rain, who's a working line German Shepherd. She's about 3 years old, I believe, 4 years old. And she actually put a dog in the hospital pretty bad. I think it cost them around $8,000 in vet bills. Small dog she got a hold of and just ripped it to shreds. She got out the house, saw the dog, and a lot of her issue is she's in prey. I don't even think it's true. It can be. I don't think it's true dog aggression. I think it stemmed from just prey drive going unsatisfied. But from talking to her owners and what I've seen, it's a behavior that's always kind of been in the background and building and building and building. And now it's to the point, it's something that was never addressed young. It's something that was probably always there. And unfortunately, she found other dogs as a way as an outlet for that prey. But I'm going through the process right now of showing her, hey, there's other ways to satisfy that drive. We're playing 2-ball, tug, doing a lot of different things for an outlet that she can bite and she is allowed to satiate that drive with. And then I'm going through and I'm layering a consequence in for showing any signs of forward aggression or prey towards dogs. And it's working really, really well. I'm able to see the difference. I got some good videos of her choosing to walk away from other dogs to come interact with the ball because there's that consequence there, but she's still getting that satisfaction of drive. But one thing I had to really stress to the owners, that didn't just go away. She may have came back to play with the ball in this instance, but there's correction that's kind of hanging over her head a little bit of, hey, it's not in your best interest to go towards that other dog. But if you were to leave her in the room alone, no equipment, no correction, and a dog and a ball sitting there, and of course one's a little bit more appealing, she didn't just forget that dogs are fun to bite. As much work as I can do, and I can kind of preface that and put a couple of steps in between, that dog's probably never going to be trustworthy around small dogs. She can be neutral, and she can be managed to a certain degree, but she's not going to all of a sudden be small dog's best friend. Maybe with a couple of dogs, if it's very contextual, she can figure it out. There's a small dog that lives in the house. Even with my Jack Russell Flip, who I've been using as a test dummy for, she's learned to be fairly neutral to him. But it's very contextual. There's rules in place, but I can't undo what was imprinted on her from a young age. I can condition a new behavior, but I can't erase what's already there.
Yeah. And I think that's probably going to be the theme for this one, is because as I'm listening, there's a lot that I'm hearing about, like essentially more of like responsible ownership for dogs. And that kind of goes, in different directions. That's your military working dog, that's your sports dog, that's your pet, that has these underlying issues from just, I don't want to speak bad against the owners. They probably didn't know in all reality. They're not sitting there, studying this like we are. And rightfully so, but they made a mistake in the conditioning process or the imprinting process, one of the two, if not both. And now these are the results where we have Rain is her name, right?
Yeah, Rain.
Yeah, I haven't met her, so I haven't been by the facility in a couple of weeks. But yeah, but we have this issue now with Rain where she feels intimidated, or at least the need at the very, very minimum to to attack dogs. And I know you mentioned the owners and like how you're explaining that this has to be managed. And it kind of brings me back to that question I wanted to ask you earlier before I forget, because I know how I am. So we were talking about distancing or whatever. And we'll say, let's dumb it down a bit, or not even, well, for me, we'll say emotional distancing instead of cognitive. I think cognitive kind of brings a different association than the intent of what the show is. So we'll say emotional distancing, because but I wanted to know, like, what's been your experience? I've done stuff with pets and I'll elaborate on mine, but you're kind of like the subject matter expert when it comes to pets and this platform. So what struggles do you see with, like, I guess, owners being able to distance themselves emotionally? And I'll kind of set the question up a little bit, just like they'll reference, like, we mentioned Johnny and Grandpa shooting, and now he's under the instruction of the Navy SEAL instructor and all that, or marksmanship instructor. But like in that translation, it would be more of like, well, you have the pet owner, he or she brings their dog in, they're explaining stuff, you're explaining your theory, the science, right? And how it kind of applies to their dog. I can see you making a face. Classic scenario. And then they reference some wild shit, like about when they were little. Well, we had a house dog and all that. So how do you work around that as far as getting them to distance themselves emotionally? So I'll preload that question, I guess.
So I probably hear it, if not every day, at least every other day, if not twice a day. But
Yeah.
the most common one is, hey, I brought this dog in. I've had 4 or 5 dogs or 1 dog before this, same breed, same age, never had this issue, right? Or, yeah, this dog was perfect. This one's a nightmare. And I've seen it to the point where people have such a pleasant memory of their past dog that because the dog looks the same or is the same breed, they expect that same kind of behavior, or they have that strong of an emotional connection to a dog who could be a complete menace. I mean, it could be ripping them to shreds, destroying their house. I'm like, oh, nope, but he looks just like Fifi, right? And that's a hard one when you're talking about people's emotions and their emotional attachment, especially the relationship we create with our dogs, because it runs deep. There's a lot of moments that they're there for us. They're quiet. They're always there. They're always listening. It's probably what most of us want out of people. And there's a deep connection to that. So the best way that I found to kind of, I don't want to say get past that, but kind of overcome that, or say, hey, we need to take a look at reality. And it really depends on like the severity of the case, right? Some people say, oh yeah, my dog jumps on me, but that's what Bruiser used to do, so I don't mind. And if they don't mind it and that's all he's doing, and that's the worst case possible thing, maybe Bruiser loved hugs, then I'll let it slide. But when we start talking about, oh, my old dog used to get on the bed with me, so I thought it was okay to let him on the bed, but this one resource guards, or he bites me whenever I try and remove him from the bed, or in this situation. So first it comes down to the severity of what's going on, and you just kind of have to reel them back in and say, hey, I know that's how you feel, and I purposely ask questions to kind of invoke those kind of responses, those emotional responses, maybe not logical responses. And then I say, hey, I know this is how you feel about it, but this is the reality of the situation, right? So when I say you are getting bit, or you are setting your dog up to go down this path of reactivity because they're not your old dog, right? Usually when you take most people back out of that situation and you just kind of give them the reality of what it is and say, this is where we're at right now, and this is what we want to avoid, they kind of self-regulate, because one, they came to training or an evaluation because they understand they have a problem or they need help, or maybe it's gotten out of their control. So they may come in and that emotional attachment kind of sparks, but I'm very quick to say, hey, but we're here for a reason. So what's going on? How can we fix this? This isn't your last dog, it doesn't sound like. And they're pretty quick to come back and say, you know what, you're right, that's why we're here. So that's generally how I go about that, is just keeping it very open and honest of, I know you love your dog, but we're creating problems, or this is what's happening because of that, because there's not enough rules or boundaries or just little things, you know? People are usually pretty good about that. They can be. I've had some people and they double down on the emotional side, and you can't help them. They don't want to hear it. They're not ready for the training yet. And typically what happens, those people come in and they say, oh, no, you're reading too much into it. I'm like, hey, he's getting ready to bite you. No, he just growls. He just shows his teeth. He's never made contact, right? And then what happens? I wait a few months, if that, getting a call back. Hey, I think we're ready for the training now.
Somebody got fucked up. That's why. It's not funny, but yeah.
And that's another one we always talk about, is the power of compulsion.
Yeah.
That is physical punishment. They are still animals, and sometimes when the dog deals out that bite, all of a sudden that's no longer Fifi anymore. They're like, oh, wait a minute, this is different. And that can sometimes bring people back in. But that's generally how it goes. It's very rare that's to the extreme that they don't listen at all. But I won't say it doesn't happen where they end up coming back after a significant event goes down.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, and I know we're going into responsible ownership and stuff like that, but the one place I thought I was not prepared to like deal with it was in the military, dude. Like, you get that crap too. Like, it's
What are some ways you see it in the military? Like with the military working dogs, or with the people, or both?
No, definitely the people. So this is gonna come off harsh, but let me preface it with I love dogs and I love what they can do and everything, and I have a strong emotion for dogs as well. But in my line of work, I have to remind Marines, whoever, I'm like, dude, there's still a piece of equipment in this capacity. And so, and what I mean by that is we have scenarios like personnel management. So let's say I assign you a dog and somebody else a dog. And then we have somebody else coming in with a brand new dog, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, John, sorry, buddy, I know you've been working with your dog for the last 2 years or so, but I got to move you to this new dog that's inbound because you have the most experience. And, I need somebody reliable that's going to be able to consistently work with this new dog that we're bringing into our program or to our kennels. And the typical response is just, it's absurd. Like, they don't understand the mission, the criteria, even though I've spelt it out to them, the why and everything behind it. But you still get this emotional correlation. Well, I don't want this new guy fucking up my dog and all this stuff. And I'm like, brother, like, it's gonna happen. One, two, you have to focus. We have a mission. We have an overall objective to accomplish. It's not you and that specific dog. Y'all aren't soulmates. And I'm not saying you can't like them, but damn, you have to be able to be flexible in that environment. And it's very hard because, in the military working dog community, even when you leave duty stations, you transfer from a base every 3 years. I didn't get to keep my first dog. She didn't go with me. And, it was a hard pill to swallow and it sucks, no doubt. But, I went from Japan to California and got my next working dog. And, you go from there.
So how does that relationship, or that specific instance you brought up, how does that affect maybe the training they're doing with the dog, or like the work they're doing with the dog? Do you see people resistant to their new dog and that kind of hurts the team a little bit or the mission? Or do people usually kind of get over it at that point? What's that like?
Yeah, so that's it's hard because I've seen both. I mean, it's really a toss up. Like it's a coin toss, man. Comes down to the individual, um, and just how emotional they are and their love for dogs. But typically, you see a slight like when you swap dogs internally, like hey, you're staying in the same kennels, but you're just going to work a different dog, and somebody else is going to work your prior dog. You see a little resistance with the guy A going to the new dog, and then what used to bother me the most, though, it was not. I mean, it's expectant that you're going to be less involved in the beginning getting a new dog because you're like, shit, I got to start over or whatever. But
Yeah.
what I used to preach to my Marines is, and I'm starting to get a little fired up because I'm going back into like whatever time frame that was. But what I would tell them, I'm like, all right, dude, you fucking really care about this dog, right? Quote, air quotes. And what have you done to stop this guy? Because I've watched this new guy correct the crap out of your dog, like left and right. And you have not given him any advice. And so I'm like, do you really care about him? Or do you just care about, you having him? And that was always my thing because it happened to me where my first working dog, I got detached from her and I had to watch somebody else work her. And I remember I was like, no. And like I immediately interjected, I'm like, that's not how she works best. Like you gotta slow it down and all that. This isn't handler's course and stuff. But that to me, that was out of genuine concern for the dog. It had nothing to
Yeah.
do with um, oh, I'm better, this
Personal
see.
feeling.
Exactly. Yeah. It's not like, oh, I knew I was better fit for that dog or whatever. But
Exactly. You're almost setting the other person up for failure. We'd all probably do pretty bad if we had no background information on what happened prior to.
exactly. And that's where you get the leverage is that, I didn't up and leave, whatever. And then he's just filling her out. Like he had the vantage point of, I could say, no, I've already done that with her. It doesn't work that well. Or, yeah, you're doing the right thing. Let's keep working it like that. And she ended up, she wasn't the world's best dog by any means because we didn't know anything in comparison to what I know now. But, we made the most of it. And so when we talk about like emotional correlations with dogs and disconnecting, there has to be, in my community anyway, there has to be a good level of that. And I'll be perfectly honest, like when we're interviewing people, well, we used to, but anyways, when I used to interview people for going to we call it a specialty section because you're a military police by trade. And then during my time, you would pretty much OJT on the job training, like after hours. And then if you did well enough, performed well enough, you would get interviewed by like the kennel staff and stuff like that. And so when I got into the position of interviewing people, call it right, wrong, or indifferent, but like when I asked somebody, why do you want to be a part of the canine unit? Oh, well, I really love dogs. I grew up with dogs and all that. And okay, that's enough. This isn't the place for you. And
Yeah.
I would explain to them, like this isn't that environment. We're not here to recreate your childhood. We're here to find bombs, drugs, hopefully maybe bite a motherfucker if we get lucky, But we have things that we have to do. And that mentality, that off rip, is not conducive to what we have to do with these dogs. So,
You know what's funny is,
what's up?
so kind of piggybacking off of that and the interviewing and that mentality just not conducive to the environment. Okay, we all love dogs. We love what we do with dogs. Let me preface with
Right.
that. But whenever we're interviewing kennel techs or new trainers coming in, the messages that come through when, let's say we put out a Facebook application. Actually, we just did one, and there's already people pouring in, hey, I just put in my application, da da da. Like you said, hey, why do you want to do this? Why do you want to be here? Oh, I just love dogs. I love to play with dogs all day, and I love for Fido and Fifi to lick me in the face. And we're like, oh yeah, thank you, but no thank you, right? Because even on the pet side of things, where that is generally okay, one, we're training. A lot of the dogs we come in have behavioral issues or some kind of deeper issue going on. With dogs, I think a big disconnect is there still needs to be a lot of structure and understanding, and there's an emotional. You need to be able to not be emotional when you're dog training. You can't be an emotional dog trainer, or even a kennel tech, because you get frustrated because this dog slapped you a piss today, jumped on
Yeah,
you. You
it's a
can't
harsh
have
reality.
an emotional
Yeah.
response. Yeah, and people don't understand that there is more than I like dogs. You may have liked your family dog or a couple of dogs, but you have to be able to disassociate from that and say, no, I understand there's a job that needs to be done, no matter to what capacity, and take the emotion out of it. So it's funny because even for us on the kennel teching and pet dog side of things, if you come in and the first thing out of your mouth is, I just love dogs so much, I want to play and do XYZ with dogs, in my mind, I'll go through the entire interview process, but in my mind, you've already lost significant points towards coming to work there.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to be dismissive for people. Like, don't people are gonna think we're assholes now? They're like, I'm never gonna
Yeah.
work with these guys. It's
No,
like,
we do love dogs.
yeah, no.
We
And
do.
I mean, I want to put out. I know we just did like uh, this little session of like complaining essentially to a degree.
Yeah.
But like in your position, when I started working with you on the pet side of things, like I remember talking to you for we had like a 2 hour discussion about clients and all that, and you're like, no, dude, you have to be able to uh you play multiple roles. I think you're explaining to me like sometimes you're their best friend, sometimes you're their therapist, and you hear all this stuff and it we'll keep the cycle of emotions
Yeah.
outside of dog training. And I'll bring it back in a minute, but it's not that I didn't, we don't like clients or anything like that. And for me, it was unexpected. I just didn't know it went that deep. I thought it was just streamlined. I take your dog, I train your dog, I tell you how the dog was trained, and then you go, like, or you ask questions, but you go and I'll do a follow up, of course. And you have access to me. That's the extent that I thought it was going to go to. But but you get situations like you mentioned at the beginning of the episode where you have people that describe their current biting dog, like that is deliberately trying to like attack them. And they're like, no, it reminds me of what's the dog's name for the episode? Fifi? That's
Fifi,
what we're
yeah.
going with. Yeah, okay. So Fifi, right? And and you're like, dude, that's not what you're dealing with, in front of you. That's
Yeah.
not, your childhood. But what I'm getting at is it's not that we don't like clients or we don't like people and stuff like that. It's just this is a different part of dog training that a lot of people don't speak about. And it
Yeah.
goes, I mean, whether you're doing military working dogs, I've had that happen. Like I've had to stop a training scenario because I'm looking at the handler. I'm like, dude, you are not doing anything remotely close to what you would normally do. And we did not see it. She was chipper, typical self. But when I saw her messing up on the leash, I'm like, that's not the dog. And I put him up. Turned out her grandmother died. I mean, we had to have like a
Yeah.
40-minute conversation about like, you don't do that. Like, this dog will be here. I will train your dog. You go, satisfy those needs and those priorities first. Because again, going back to it, if you really fucking care about what you're doing, you look like crap out there because you did not, you know, address something that's bigger than this dog. And so it kind of translates into that. But the other part too is just knowing, like you said, I'm a big proponent of emotions do not go in dog training, right? And I know that's impossible to do because you've stopped me. I get frustrated. I'm like, dude, what the fuck's wrong with this dog? You're like,
Oh, yeah,
no,
we all do it,
relax.
man.
Look at, yeah, but as much as possible. And one thing that clicked for me, and I'll probably start doing this if I ever have to interview people again. But if you look at the quadrants of training, you have, here we go, positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, positive punishment, negative punishment, right? If you look at any definition or anything, what's the one thing that's not present or accounted for is
Emotion.
emotion. Yeah, there's no, and I have my thoughts about it. I think it should be accounted for or included to a degree, but there's a reason for it because the training of a dog or anybody really is very mainstream, very simplistic. We kind of overcomplicate it when we have dogs, and a good portion of it is due to emotion. But it's a
Yeah.
very logical based decision. Dog does this, it's either a consequence or a reinforcer of some type. Well, and that correlates with the dog's behavior. And you can condition it, you can have it, train it operantly, where the dog discovers its own actions, dictates what punishers and reinforcers are going to come. But however you do it, there shouldn't be, a strong emotional correlation between the trainer and the dog and what's going on. And I think
Yeah.
that saved me a lot, as far as training.
I think part of the reason why, as dog trainers, we almost make good therapists, because even this week, I had a private lesson, and all we did was walk for an hour. We talked about our dog and the incident that happened the week before, or actually, it was about 2 days before I got there. We went around, we walked, and we talked about that incident. And then she told me all the positives she likes about this dog and dogs she had growing up and why she's so persistent on making it work with this dog. And that's all we did for the hour. We walked around our neighborhood and we just talked. And I think part of the reason why we make such good counselors or therapists or however you want to view it, even you pulling that young lady aside to talk to her about, hey, I can see your emotion going over into the training, is because everyone around us, when you're in charge of the training or you're responsible for that dog, everyone else is already so emotional. You have to take that out of it. You have to say what is best for the dog in this instance. But what's best for the dog, generally, if we can take the emotion away for a second in the actual training portion, ends up ultimately being what's best for the person as well. Because it's going to make their life easier with the dog. They're not going to create issues. If you had let that training session goes on, who knows what could have happened, what new habits or fears or issues she could have instilled in that dog just through unclear communication.
Yeah, and that's a big point to touch on, and I think it goes back to like one of the previous episodes that we made as far as like dogs build bridges and stuff like that. It's not that I don't care about people, I don't care about dogs or whatever. But when you're in a position, like you said, to manage, let's say, training or to, supervise something, you take a different approach to it. And you have to look at things more objectively than subjective. And I think it can be a vantage point if you use it correctly, just like any other tool. But but it gives you a different mindset. Like, that same scenario, I was able to look at it objectively initially because I'm looking at the results that should be produced from the training. And then I noticed that it's not happening. We're not hitting these wickets. And so now I'm able to scale it back. All right, what's the dog doing? Was my first instinct. And looking at it from an objective standpoint. And I'm like, what's the dog doing? No, he's doing pretty much, he's responding to what he should be, as far as the communication aspect between the handler and the dog. And so that caused me to look at, all right, now what is the handler doing that I can maybe advise on? And when I looked at her and made my analysis, I'm like, nothing adds up. And so, and it was, I was allowed to, it permitted me to help her. And it's been constant throughout my career as far as that aspect. And even dealing with people in the pet industry, just reassuring them that they have the skill set, they have the knowledge. And when they mess up, there's appropriate time to critique. And then there's other times, half the time I laugh it off. I'm like, oh, that's not, it's nothing permanent. We're good, or whatever. Yeah. Or even in the videos now that I send back to my clients. And I think this is something you had to tell me from an objective standpoint. You're like, no, just send the footage. Like, you mess up too. And you're like, you don't always have to send them a perfect video. The dog did everything immaculate every day. And you're like, you kind of could do the opposite. It's like, well, damn, he's doing well for this guy, but He doesn't do anything when he's in this environment. It can create speculation. So, me being emotionally involved, right? I'm like, no,
Exactly.
I want to show my clients the best, and slightly egotistical. I'm like, it's got to be flawless. And then you stepped in, you're looking at it because it's your business, and you're like, no, dude, that's not how that works. And so it goes, you know, it goes full circle, and I'm not exempt from that reality check. To be honest, is what it is.
Yeah,
And
no, we all fall into that category. I mean,
yeah,
I've talked to you. How many times have I called you about Mona, my new Mal puppy? She's probably 6 months old now, and then I've got my 5-year-old German Shepherd. How many times have I called you and said, "Hey, man, Apex didn't do this. This is different," or I don't know, and I'm doing exactly what I get on my clients about. Like, that's not what he did. But it's part of it's overthinking and then expectation. There's a level of emotion involved.
yeah,
I'm raising this puppy and I want it to be better than my last dog, or at least as good as my last dog. So I'm already kind of starting in a deficit because I'm bringing emotion onto a blank canvas that she had nothing to do with. She wasn't there for those 5 years. But
yeah.
I have to
That's
call you and check myself, and you check me, and you're like, "Hey, dude, she's a blank slate. She's young. You know more. You're starting over. You got to give her the benefit of the doubt and take the emotion out of it."
yeah, and that's oh man, it's wild to me that like how much we play into emotions, and we don't. I mean, yeah, some things we can realize, and I think you and I are getting a better understanding of like, all right, no, this is just me, about to react off of emotion. But funny case that I won't go into detail, but the situation I messaged you about, where we had Alex, one of the trainers at the facility.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yep.
well, I guess we could talk about it. But this is kind of going off the rails. But this is the business side of things. So situation is I had an emergency. I had to leave. I had a dog that I had been training for a little bit, and it came down to her going home and doing the class. We call it a go home, where the client comes back, reunites the dog, and the trainer gives them a formal, a formal class on how to operate the prong collar, the electric or e-collar, things like that. Anyways, I wasn't able to attend it. I had something come up, and so I had a guy step in for me. And I told him, I was like, he's coming up in training and just getting into it. So I'm like, all right, man, he would have did it for free, I'm sure of it, if I just asked him for as a favor. But I told him I give him a prorated version of or prorated compensation of my pay. And so, long story short, go home goes good, everything. So now we're at the business end of getting paid, and I prorated it, and we're texting back and forth, prorated it, and I told him a certain dollar amount, and he's like, "All right, well, can you add more money to it because I'm doing the go home for you?" And I instantly went like off the rails, like I was livid. I'm typing this message. I'm like, "What the fuck is wrong with this guy?" And but I know him, like I know him, the guy, and he's not a bad dude. Like he's not a dude. I think that's what pissed me off more is that I wasn't expecting something like that. I'm like, why would you do this? But
They're out of the blue.
yeah. So and I have relapses. I'm pretty calm now, but certain things piss me off, just like anybody else. But I was like, what am I doing? I was just about to hit send, and I sent the message to you, and I was just like, dude, just look over this situation and tell me like before I fuck this all up. And a portion of that is my conditioning on looking at things objectively, because I'm like, if I ruin this relationship with this guy, it's just going to put constraints on the business aspect, and it's just this whole domino effect, and I'm like, I don't want that. And so I sent it to you, and you're like, no, dude, you didn't explain to him that you're prorating anything. He's like, he thinks you're just making that number up. So he doesn't have, so he's just trying to round the number off. That's what, and I was like, shit, dude, I almost destroyed a whole relationship
Yeah.
being
But
emotional,
and I'm willing to bet. So kind of touch on the emotional dissonance thing. I'm willing to bet at
Mhm.
some point in your life, something happened where it was probably a very similar situation.
Oh
where
yeah,
they're like, "Hey, you actually need to just go ahead and pay me this much." And it probably struck nerve. It was probably imprinted in you, that response.
bro. I can tell
And
you it is. my
yeah,
fucking my fucking brother. And like he started out and, like I'd
see,
give
and
him
that's
money, he'd say he'd pay me back, and like just wouldn't happen and shit like that. I mean, we have a good relationship. It was whatever. But
yeah,
yeah,
but
now that I'm
growing
thinking
up
about
with
it,
them,
yeah, I'm very suspicious about like people asking for more than what and I'm very strict on like as far as people getting paid and stuff like that. I'm very strict on you give it at a minimum what you deserve, and then
yeah.
we'll go from there if you earn something more. But to
So
dig
that's
me out of that
classic.
shitty hole of like, oh my god, if anything financially is gonna flip, I did end up
Yeah,
paying him the full amount, like the $300. It was like prorated at 260, and I did end up giving him the 300 because I was a day late on paying him.
yeah,
So I was, but but yeah, no, it's just funny how quickly you can snap into it, and I mean, if you don't have any checks and balances, man, it can go wrong. And I mean, I've seen it so many times in training, just not being able to read the lines. And it's
yeah,
like, dude, your dog, you're telling me the dog knows how to sit or it knows how to down, and it's not doing it for whatever reason and all that. And people are just, I had to stop people. They're just hammering dogs. And and it's like, dude, he doesn't know it. Like just put him up. And but it becomes an emotional state where they believe that the dog knows something that they clearly don't in that context or that scenario, whatever you want to say. And but they're committed to like making the dog do it. And a lot of times you just have to put the dog away, get to the whiteboard or get on the phone with somebody that knows what they're doing and figure out, what are the intricate details of why this behavior or whatever you're trying to accomplish isn't happening.
yeah,
And I've done it so many times where, I've done it with you, I've done it with other mentors, and I'm like, dude, I know I'm wrong, but I cannot detach myself emotionally. I'm like, this motherfucker knows it. And I'm like, it's like, and I know he doesn't, but I just can't get away from that, that emotional thing. So I think the other part for pet owners, trainers, or any capacity of dog ownership is knowing how to have a strong reference, base where you can reach out to somebody and say, dude, let me get your opinion on this and see what's going on or what it actually is. Because they don't, like you mentioned before, they don't have that emotional correlation. Like when I train dogs for clients, it's not that I don't care about the dog's well being. I don't live with it. I don't have that emotional, correlation of,
yeah.
oh,
He
this
didn't
is
rip
my
apart your couch that you just paid off. You didn't get
no.
that all the emotion that flooded in with that feeling.
Or I think even worse though, because all right, at the worst of things, people dog rips a couch and let's just say they go off the run, they may smack the dog a couple of times or whatever. And, and you kind of get over that relatively quick from what I've seen from clients. Like it's almost like a relief in some weird reason. But well, it's not weird. I know the science, but I'm trying not to go into that. But I think the harder part is what happens after the dog rips the couch or after it receives the punishment. What does the dog typically do for pets? They end up sleeping with them. They're still their baby and all that. And I don't have that, with the dog, like, on that end. Like, and it's not, so I'm not, it's not, I'm not, um, what's the verbiage I want to use? I'm
I think
not
I know what you're going for.
slow to correct the dog once it actually knows what to do. And
Yes.
once I've taught the dog, pressure and all that, and its advantages out of pressure and everything like that, like we've done the foundational work and all that. And even doing the foundational work is a process that I think that's why we're in business right now, is because, in all reality, it's hard to watch because of the physical response from the dog. If a dog is gator rolling or it's, trying to paw at the leash or whatever, it looks like,
When you first
the
apply the
dog is,
pressure and it doesn't know its advantage out yet.
yeah, in the initial, because they're not going to know it. It's only one
Yeah.
way to teach them.
Yeah.
But for me, depending on the severity of the response from the dog, I'm not going to sit there and dangle a dog or anything like that, for an extensive amount of time. If I'm looking for a dog to sit, maybe I relieve the pressure when it folds, just flexes its hind legs, and I start incrementally building into a sit. But, um, but again, the emotional correlation is not there. I know what needs to be done. I know the relief of pressure in any aspect is a teaching moment, and you can either teach the dog that pawing or biting at the leash is the way it's advantage, or I can teach them to flex their legs and sit, if that's what we're aiming for. But I wouldn't expect somebody that's had this dog from a puppy, doesn't know anything about dog training, and sleeps with this dog every night, and talks to it about its deepest, darkest secrets, to sit there and say, I'm going to apply pressure and, I'm just going to watch this go through. That's what we're there to circumvent that process. But,
Yeah. I've seen that a lot on the pet dog side of things, especially. So I'll have clients that come in, and a lot of times dog training comes down to time constraints, especially within private lessons. Some people you can tell are just there for a quick fix. They're not really going to stick with it. Which, again, being objective, do I think that's the best way? No. But if I know ultimately I can just show them a couple of things with some pressure that ultimately will lead to some relief of the problem they're having with their dog, which is going to benefit both of them, then sometimes I'll do it. And I'll show them, like, hey, we're just going to apply slight leash pressure, pick up, and guide the dog into the sit. Like you said, look for that flex, that initial response. And they could have a dog that walked in that I've had a lady come in, dog broke 2 of her ribs because it snatched her down. She was very limited financially on what she could afford and how much time she had. But she's like, hey, I've got maybe 2 lessons max. So I got 2 lessons in me that I can keep up with before this dog gets put down or goes to the shelter or never walks again. So I'm like, okay, hey, we're going to go ahead and go to a prong collar, or we started with a slip leash. We're going to get to a prong collar that within that same lesson, which is much quicker than I would generally do it. But the first time I applied that pressure, her dog, who was already a little nervous, did panic, and it was very slight pressure, but the dog's already a little nervous. And the dog whined, it jumped a little bit, it started to go into an alligator roll, and I'd already positioned it where it wasn't able to do that, just to limit the options. But she started to shed a tear, and I'm like, hey, I know this is hard, but because of the situation you're in, we're just going to work through it. And that happened maybe twice. And it probably lasts a total of 10 seconds if you combine the two. By the 3rd rep, I lifted pressure. The dog waited maybe half a second and then sat. And very quickly, we got into the reps where the dog said, okay, I now understand my way out of the pressure. But again, the whole emotional dissonance thing, right? It's contradictory information. They have an emotional attachment and they say, oh, hey, my dog's hurt or in pain or not understanding or conflicted in some way. And it triggers this big emotional response out of the owner. But I'm there guiding them saying, hey, this is just the science of it. The dog just doesn't know how to shut off the pressure. The alligator rolling, the biting the leash, anything like that is just them trying to find their advantage. And it's my job to guide them through that process. And we're going to get there. But the toll and the wave of emotion you see the owners go through in that moment, of tears to happiness by, within a 5-minute span sometimes, of, oh my God, he did it. Hey, he's not pulling me anymore. Hey, I don't have to worry about him breaking my ribs right now. It's a roller coaster ride of emotion for him. And I think that's emotion and time, or I know something me and you have talked about, are heavy, heavy effects on dog training. They play a huge role into it. And I really like this topic because it applies in so many aspects, but it's something we really need to be more aware of, how the owners are feeling, their emotional connection, and then sometimes pulling our emotion out of it so we can get the job done for them and ultimately build to a better relationship.
Yeah, for sure. I think that last part about knowing the owner, like what type of person they are, and we'll start wrapping up in a few minutes. But I do want to touch on that part. I know we went through like a big spill of how to use pressure, and I don't want people to feel like, oh, that's our go-to thing. Pressure for me is very reliable. And like you said in that example, is pretty mainstream, and it goes by relatively quickly if you know how to time it correctly, of course. But the other aspect is, like, I remember I've had clients that would not accept the use of a prong collar, the use of a e-collar, or any type of like what they perceived as an aversive. And and I try to educate. I try to educate them, like, hey, this is going to be the best route for you, what you're doing. But I'm also not going to have like an hour-long conversation that I would have with you. Like, let's say you and I disagree about a training, theory. Yeah, I will talk more about that and more extensively to try to sell you on my beliefs, or at least provoke a logical counter to what I'm thinking. But with a pet owner that's just terrified of the use of a tool, at a certain level, I just kind of, all right, now the alternative is I can do this very positively, but the dog's going to be, either he's going to be at the facility for, twice as longer. I can offer you a 10-day, or I can offer you, a 30-day training plan. And you could save a lot of money on this 10-day, just accept that he's going to have to use a tool, or we can do it, 3 times the amount of time and probably, money or whatever. But we can do it how you envision this positively. And I'm going to be honest with you, there's nothing saying that it's reliable, because you have no way of, doing it. But my whole point of bringing that up is that, like you mentioned, there is a level to being emotionally distanced from the dog, for sure, for the training aspect. But there's a balance where you can't be too emotionally distant from the owner that you can't work with them. And I think that's a big consideration to make as far as people that are going into especially the pet training industry. Well,
Yeah, hey, you're still in the studio, right?
yes.
Okay, all right. Do not leave the studio. All
What
right.
happened?
It said it had an issue connecting to the servers. But if you stay in, I should be able to come back in, and we keep all the content.
Hi, you've reached Jonathan Moses at Low Country Canine. Sorry, I missed your call. If you could leave your name and phone number, I'll
I'm hoping you did not just lose that whole thing.
No, it's still recording.
It's still recording?
On my end, it's at 105.
On my end, the timer started over.
Bitch. I don't know how to do this. Because I can't stop it.
Oh, shit. You know what?
What?
I'm going to stop it on my end. And we'll see if it uploads from yours.
Oh, God. That was a damn good episode, too.
That was fucking fantastic.
Fuck.
All right, in case it did, let's go ahead and wrap this episode up. So we'll see what happens here. You're either just going to hear this clip of us going, God damn it, we lost it all. Or we'll wrap up how we were talking about the emotional dissonance between dogs, people, and how it affects training in general. So hopefully record the episode because, according to us, it was pretty damn good, and I feel like we're pretty unbiased.
Yeah, I mean, my standards are pretty high.
Yeah.
It felt good. Let's just say that.
Oh, all right.
Man.
Well, I'm going to stop the recording, and we're going to see what we got. But, next week on Working Dogs and Whiskey, we'll see you later.